Now, what's really important about this project is that it gave children the space in which, one, to have ideas, but then to make the idea happen. And for most people, the problem is not having the idea, it's believing that you can make it happen. And for these children in particular, who come from this particular community, where there's no belief that there'll be any change at all, this experience they'll never forget for the rest of their lives. Because they will have had an idea and they will have seen it happen, and for the first time they will begin to believe that change is possible. And that's the really important thing that you're trying to get from people, get into people, is that belief that you can make those kinds of things happen. The other thing is that children have a natural understanding of education. They actually arrive at school as learning machines, and they really understand the intrinsic nature of education. And then I think we spend many years unteaching them. This is a project with a group of year 4s, so there's 7 or 8 girls, in which the school at the beginning of a term, they went on to do other projects, but they just wanted to have a discussion with the children about education, and what makes a good education. And on the first day, the Monday, the children all sat down and they came up with a list of what they thought made a good education. And they thought a good learning environment, libraries, which are nice and quiet, classrooms, universities, colleges, secondary schools, people who are smart, like teachers, books, lessons, which are boring, internet calculators, pens, pencils, exercise books, and whiteboards. So they described what they needed to be education, because they went to school, that's what school looks like. The adults tell me that's education, so I'll write it down. So the adults said, okay, now we're going to think about this. They spent quite a lot of time on the internet looking at other kinds of education. So they found photographs of other children of the same sort of age in other places. This is in Taiwan. And they thought, probably a little less equipment than we've got, but I recognise that as a classroom. Yes, this is exactly the same education. They looked at homeschooling. They thought that was really interesting, and that seemed to open up all sorts of other possibilities for education. They looked at some schools in Africa, and they thought, well, that looks a bit like education to me as well, but it doesn't have any equipment or books, but I can recognise that. That's a learning environment in Africa as well. That's a learning environment in Africa as well. So they began to think about how important the building and the space is. And they began to think, that's a fantastic learning environment. It's a really good one. Very good place to start learning. They went to an adventure playground and they thought that was a brilliant learning environment. In fact, a much better learning environment than any school that they had ever been to. At the end of the week, they went and visited some people at work. And they also went to a university and looked at university. And then they were asked to write down what they thought made a good learning environment. And this time they said, fun and some equipment. Actually, we don't even need the equipment, but we need the fun. Each other. Educational stuff is everywhere. You can just read a book. Outside, you don't need walls. Concentration. Games help you learn. You can find out things for yourself. People have to learn at work all the time. Just because you already know things and have a job doesn't mean you know anything useful. Now, I was doing this, showing these slides at a presentation at Teacher Training College the other day, and the professor said, lots of people have spent 40 years wondering about education, and it took these children just a week to begin to understand it. But so much of the structure that we've built around education, we need buildings, we need blackboards, we need teachers and so forth. Actually, that's not really that. They're helpful. They're not absolutely essential. The learning is inside you. And how do you unlock the ability to learn in young people and allow them to go and do the learning themselves? And you unlock them almost by taking them back to where they were when they started. Because actually they're desperate to learn. It's really what they want to do. We do a huge amount of research on our programs. One of the advantages we have is because the programs have been so big, is that we can study people young people over long periods of time and in very large numbers to see the impact of the work that we do. Our research has shown, for a number of years, we've been tracking 13,000 young people who have been involved in our programs, and we've been comparing them with hundreds of thousands of other young people not in our programs, because we can use our education ministry's computers in order to be able to do that. And it's now showing that on average, being involved in the program is worth 2.5 grades at the age of 16 in your final exam results. So it's statistically significant improvement. When researchers do this research, they talk about statistically significant. And we say, what does statistically significant mean? And they say, well, it means that there is a correlation between being involved in the activity and better exam results. But it isn't necessarily educationally significant. And we say, what's educationally significant mean? And they said the statistical variance is so big that there's no other possible explanation. And we say, and do you often find this in your educational research? And they go, no, we never find educationally significant because it's too big. But one of the things that we asked them to do was to look at the difference in attendance levels in our schools versus not our schools. And they found an educationally significant improvement in attendance levels. Because kids in our schools are having such a good time, they turn up to school in huge numbers in ways that they don't do in normal schools. And actually, you're never going to get your kids educated if they're not in the school, you know. And we've often said to the government, if we'd achieved nothing else, just getting them all to turn up was really important. Our research has shown that we're very successful at engaging parents in their children's education. The predictor of success in education is the engagement of your parents. If your parents care about your education, you'll do well. If they don't care, you'll do badly. That's the rule. We're very successful at getting the parents who aren't engaged, very engaged. And the reason is because children are having so much fun, they go home and they talk about what they're doing. And that gives the parents a window on what's actually going on within the children's life. It gives them the opportunity to begin to engage and make things happen. We've shown that our programs strengthen teacher skills and teacher motivation. And in a big piece of research that we published just 6 months ago now, we've shown that the government gets back £15 for every £1 they invest in this program because of the long-term impact it has on young people. So this is really, really thoroughly researched and studied in order to provide the evidence that this approach really makes the difference that we want to have. And Ofsted is the British government inspectorate of schools. They visit all the schools and inspect them all, and they have done inquiries into us, inspected us twice in the last few years. And in their last report, which was in January last year, 12 months ago, they said there is not a conflict between the national curriculum standards and subjects and creative approaches. Because a lot of time people say, creativity is all very well, but if we all let the children be creative, they'll never do their work, and so on. They said it's not true. The opposite is true. You introduced a creative education, and as it says here, that these examples, the schools they visited, showed that it was accompanied by better than average achievement. So there are schools that they visited, the level of attainment of children was higher, or it was getting better faster as a result of being involved in the program. So this makes a huge difference.